At 11:47 a.m. on May 29, 1943, Captain James Hartwell climbed into the cockpit of his B-17 at RAF Allenbury. He watched the ground crew load the final belt of .50 caliber ammunition into the modified bomber's 17th gun position. He was 26 years old with 42 combat missions and no experience with the aircraft he was about to fly. The YB-40 weighed 4,000 pounds more than any flying fortress he had handled before. In the 3 months leading up to May, the 8th Air Force had lost 173 B-17s over Europe. Without long-range fighter escort, German interceptors heavily attacked bomber formations on the return leg from targets deep inside the Reich. Focke-Wulf 190s attacked from high positions where the B-17 nose guns could not respond quickly. Messerschmitt 109s dived through formations and targeted bombers that fell behind. Crews called this stretch the gauntlet, and many did not survive long enough to complete 25 missions. The solution appeared simple. If fighters could not escort bombers all the way into Germany and back, then a bomber would be turned into a fighter. Army Air Forces engineers removed everything from a B-17F that was not related to defense. Bombs were removed. The bombardier station was converted into a twin .50 caliber chin turret. A second dorsal turret was added behind the radio room. Single waist guns were replaced with twin mounts. Additional guns were installed in the forward fuselage. Ammunition capacity increased to 11,275 rounds. Extra armor plating was added around crew positions. One aircraft now carried 16 .50 caliber machine guns. This version was named the YB-40 and referred to as the Flying Destroyer. Douglas Aircraft in Tulsa completed 12 conversions by March, and the 92nd Bombardment Group at Allenbury received them in early May. Colonel William Reed selected 7 crews for the first combat test, and Hartwell was assigned aircraft 425738, which his crew named Hedgehog. The added weight created problems. A standard B-17F could reach 20,000 feet in 25 minutes, but the YB-40 required 48 minutes. The control yoke felt heavier and less responsive. A test pilot at Wright Field had warned Hartwell that the center of gravity was off due to the large amount of ammunition behind the bomb bay. However, the firepower was unmatched. Hartwell had never seen such defensive strength on a bomber. The chin turret alone could damage a Focke-Wulf before it closed into range. Every direction was covered with overlapping fire, and every attack angle had a response. The mission briefing was clear. Escort the main formation to St. Nazaire and strike the submarine pens. 7 YB-40s were placed in the most exposed positions, including the low squadron and trailing elements where German fighters usually attacked. Hartwell started the engines at 1:25 p.m. All 4 Wright Cyclones ran smoothly. The tower cleared them for takeoff at 1:50. Hedgehog moved down the runway along with 168 other B-17s. Target time was set for 4 p.m. The formation reached the French coast at 3:30. Anti-aircraft fire filled the sky over Guernsey. Radio reports confirmed German fighters launching from airfields near Rennes. Hartwell's flight engineer reported higher fuel consumption than expected because the YB-40 used more fuel during the climb. St. Nazaire came into view through broken clouds at 4:02 p.m. The main force released their bombs and began the return flight. Lighter B-17s climbed faster and gained speed. Hartwell increased throttle, but Hedgehog began to fall behind. The standard bombers moved ahead at 160 miles per hour while Hedgehog could only maintain 148. Technical Sergeant Paul Morrison, the flight engineer, climbed down from the top turret to check the engines. He was 31 years old with 200 hours of maintenance experience on B-17s before the YB-40 conversion. He reviewed the instruments and noticed the number 3-cylinder head temperature rising into the red zone. The added weight and drag forced the engines to work beyond normal limits. Morrison reduced power on the number 3 engine to prevent damage. Hedgehog slowed further to 142 miles per hour. The main formation was now 3 miles ahead and increasing the distance. Hartwell could see the other 6 YB-40s also struggling at the rear of their groups, and each one was falling behind. The radio operator Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney reported contrails high above at 4 o'clock position. German fighters were climbing to intercept. Focke-Wulf 190s from Jägerschwader II based at Vennes were approaching in a group of 6 or possibly 8 aircraft. They were targeting isolated bombers. Hartwell ordered all gunners to track targets. The Chin turret gunner confirmed clear visibility. The ball turret rotated without issue. Both waist gunners reported their twin mounts were ready. The first Focke-Wulf attacked from the rear at a range of 1,200 yards. The tail gunner opened fire at 800 yards. Tracer rounds moved toward the fighter and the German pilot broke away without firing. A second attack followed from above. 2 Focke-Wulfs approached in sequence. The Chin turret gunner tracked the lead aircraft and fired a short burst. The round struck the engine cowling of the FW-190 and black smoke appeared. The fighter rolled over and descended toward the channel. Delaney confirmed the kill from his position. The second aircraft disengaged. For 6 minutes the YB-40 performed as intended. Additional German fighters attempted to approach, but each attack ended early due to the strong defensive fire. The 16 guns created a dense field of fire that discouraged direct engagement. However, Hedgehog continued to lose speed. The main formation moved 6 miles ahead and then 7. Hartwell could barely see them in the distance. Morrison reported fuel status and confirmed they had used 800 gallons more than planned. At current power they had about 90 minutes of fuel remaining, while the main formation would land in 70 minutes. Another pair of Focke-Wulfs appeared. These pilots did not withdraw. They recognized that the YB-40 could not keep pace and could not escape. The fighters stayed at a distance waiting for the bomber to fall further behind and preparing for a coordinated attack. Hartwell increased throttle again. The number 3 engine temperature rose back into the red. Morrison monitored the situation closely. The escort aircraft designed to protect others had become vulnerable itself. At 4:43 p.m., the next attack began. 3 Focke-Wulfs approached from different directions, including high right, low left, and directly ahead at level. Hartwell could not maneuver effectively due to the weight of the aircraft. He maintained course and altitude while the gunners engaged all targets at once. The Chin turret focused on the frontal attacker. The top turret turned to the right while the ball turret moved to the left. Both waist gunners fired through opposite windows. Spent shells fell inside the fuselage as the aircraft shook from the recoil of 8 guns firing together. The lead Focke-Wulf's canopy broke apart and the fighter rolled to the right before dropping away with smoke trailing behind it. The high attacker disengaged early. The low attacker continued his approach and fired a short burst. 20 mm round struck Hedgehog's right wing. One hydraulic line was cut. The waist gunner reported fluid spreading across the window. Delaney confirmed the damage and stated that the right landing gear hydraulic system had failed. They would need to lower the gear manually if they managed to return. Morrison checked the fuel again and estimated 72 minutes remaining to reach Allenbury at the current power setting. The main formation was now 8 miles ahead and still increasing distance. They were alone over occupied France with German fighters nearby. The radio transmitted another call from a YB-40 crew of the 305th Bomb Group. Captain Richard Hayes flying aircraft 425741 reported that his aircraft had also fallen behind. 2 YB-40 aircraft were now separated from the formation. Both were struggling to hold airspeed and both were using more fuel than planned. Hayes suggested joining together since combined defensive fire from 32 guns could provide better protection. Hartwell agreed. Hayes descended from 21,000 feet to match Hedgehog at 19,500 feet. The Focke-Wulf stayed at a distance with 4 visible and possibly more. They avoided attacking the 2 gunships flying close together but did not leave the area. At 5:07 p.m. Hartwell crossed the French coast on the return path. The channel appeared grey and empty below. The distance to the English coast was 53 miles, which meant about 41 minutes of flight at their current speed. The number 3 engine continued running hot. Morrison had already reduced power twice. They could not hold altitude much longer. Hedgehog slowly descended through 19,000 feet, then lower to 18,800 and then 18,600. Hayes reported that his number 2 engine oil pressure was dropping. He reduced power to prevent engine failure. His YB-40 slowed to 138 miles per hour. Both aircraft were struggling to maintain flight. Both crews watched their fuel levels decrease while hoping the German fighters would not continue over the water. At 5:22 p.m., 2 Messerschmitt 109s appeared from the rear at a higher position. They were following the isolated bombers toward the channel. The tail gunners reported the incoming fighters at a range of 400 yards and closing. The fighters descended through 18,000 feet and opened fire at 800 yards. Hartwell could not climb or increase speed and could not turn sharply enough to disrupt their aim. The YB-40 had become an exposed target with no support around it. The tail gunner fired first. Staff Sergeant Raymond Kack was 24 years old and had been a competitive marksman before the war. He had not faced targets moving at such speed. The lead Messerschmitt closed to 600 yards. Kack adjusted his tracers across open sky, but the German pilot maneuvered quickly left and right and then dove at a shallow angle. The second fighter followed the same movement. Both aircraft opened fire at 400 yards. Cannon shells struck Hedgehog's tail section. One round detonated in the horizontal stabilizer. Another passed through the fuselage just behind Kack's position. The aircraft shook and Hartwell felt the controls become less responsive. Morrison moved back to inspect the damage. The elevator cables were still intact, but the trim tab mechanism was stuck. Hartwell understood he would need to hold the control yoke firmly for the entire return to England. The Messerschmitts climbed and prepared for another attack. Hayes opened fire from his dorsal guns. The combined fire from both aircraft filled the air with tracers. The German fighters turned away and climbed back to altitude. At 5:31 p.m., for Republic P-47 Thunderbolt fighters appeared from the northeast. These were long-range escort aircraft returning from a sweep over Belgium. They had received radio reports about isolated bombers under attack. The Thunderbolts moved toward the Messerschmitts. The German pilots saw them and turned back toward France. The P-47s did not continue the chase. They formed alongside the 2 YB-40s and signaled escort toward the English coast. Hartwell checked the fuel and saw 37 minutes remaining at the current power setting. The distance to land was 29 miles. They would reach it with little margin. At this point the weakness of the concept was clear. The YB-40 performed well as a gun platform. Its heavy armament could damage any fighter that came close. The chin turret alone had improved defense against frontal attacks. However, the added weight reduced its effectiveness. After bomb release, the standard B-17s climbed faster and flew higher. The YB-40 still carried more than 11,000 rounds of ammunition, which added about 4,000 pounds. This reduced speed and made it fall behind and become a target instead of providing protection. Hayes reported at 5:47 p.m. that his number 2 engine had failed. Oil pressure had dropped to 0 and he had shut down the engine. His aircraft began descending through 15,000 feet on 3 engines. Morrison reviewed the situation and determined that Hayes would not reach Allenbury and might not reach England. His fuel use with 3 engines was too high. The English coast came into view at 5:53 p.m. Hayes turned toward the nearest airfield, which was RAF Manston. He contacted the tower and declared an emergency. He was cleared for immediate landing. Hartwell watched as Hayes descended toward the field. One aircraft was returning with engine failure while the other was damaged and difficult to control. Both would need extensive repairs before flying again. At 6:18 p.m., Hedgehog landed at Allenbury. Hartwell lowered the landing gear manually. The right main gear locked into place seconds before touchdown. Ground crews inspected the aircraft and found 16 bullet holes in the fuselage along with a damaged hydraulic line, a stuck trim tab and a damaged horizontal stabilizer. Colonel Reed was waiting and asked for Hartwell's report. This was the first combat test of the YB-40, which had been designed to protect bomber formations during the full mission to Germany and back. Hartwell shut down the engines and climbed out. His flight suit was wet with sweat and his hands were still unsteady after managing the controls for 90 minutes. He looked at Reed and gave a direct conclusion that ended the program. It cannot keep up. Reed ordered additional missions to confirm the results. He considered the possibility that the first test was not typical and that different tactics or positioning might improve performance. The second mission launched on June 15 against a target at Luma. 4 YB-40s were used and all 4 fell behind after bomb release. The third mission on June 22 targeted the IG Farben synthetic rubber plant at Hulse. 11 YB-40s were sent. 1 was lost to anti-aircraft fire and fighters while the remaining 10 returned well after the main formation had already landed. Engineers at Abbott's Ripton Depot began working on further modifications. They adjusted the waste gun feeds and changed how ammunition was loaded. They also moved weight forward to correct the center of gravity. None of these changes solved the issue. The main problem remained. AB-17F carrying bombs weighed about 65,000 pounds at takeoff. After releasing bombs it dropped to 48,000. The YB-40 weighed 68,000 at takeoff and after combat it still weighed 64,000. It carried 4,000 pounds of guns and ammunition that could not be released. On June 28, 6 YB-40s attacked St. Nazaire again. They reported 1 German fighter destroyed. All 6 aircraft fell behind during the return. One crew stated they were alone over France for 43 minutes. Being alone meant exposure. The aircraft created to defend bombers required protection itself. The 8th Air Force reviewed the data after several missions. A total of 48 sorties were flown with 5 confirmed fighter kills and 2 probable. 1 YB-40 was lost. Every aircraft fell behind its formation after bomb release. The average separation was 7 miles and the average time alone over enemy territory was 38 minutes. Adolf Galland reviewed these reports. German pilots quickly recognized the YB-40. The aircraft looked different due to extra turrets and the absence of bomb bay doors. They were placed in exposed positions. After bomb release they became stragglers. German fighters focused on these targets. Galland concluded that the results were not effective compared to the cost. His pilots preferred to engage these aircraft because they were slower and could not escape. On July 29 the final 2 YB-40s flew their last combat mission. The target was U-boat facilities at Kiel. Both aircraft again fell behind and required escort to reach England. Both landed at emergency fields before reaching their base. In August General Karl Spaatz cancelled the program. The 12 remaining YB-40 aircraft returned to the United States in November. Most were used for gunnery training while 4 were converted back into standard bombers. The concept ended after 3 months of combat testing. The Army Air Forces had spent $469,000 per aircraft on the conversion. 12 aircraft resulted in a total cost of about $5.6 million for a system that increased vulnerability instead of improving protection. However, one feature from the YB-40 proved effective. Engineers at Wright Field studied combat reports and identified a key advantage. When YB-40 aircraft engaged fighters from the front, the attacks were stopped. The Chin turret provided a clear forward firing position with 2 .50 caliber guns. It removed blind spots and improved defense against direct frontal attacks. This design was sent to Boeing for production. The Bendix Chin turret developed from the YB-40 program entered service in September 1943. It was designated as the Bendix Model A and used two Browning M2 machine guns with remote control from the bombardier position and 300 rounds per gun. It used electric systems for movement and aiming. Douglas Aircraft Company installed this turret on the final 86 B-17F aircraft produced. These bombers arrived in England in October. Crews considered it an effective solution to frontal attacks. Before this addition, German fighters attacked directly from the front where defensive coverage was limited. The bombardier position had two side-mounted guns with restricted movement and limited coverage. Enemy pilots approached head-on and fired through gaps in the defensive range. Focke-Wulf 190 fighters destroyed more B-17s through frontal attacks than any other method. The Chin turret removed this weakness by providing full forward coverage. The bombardier could track incoming fighters using a simple sight and fire directly ahead. 2. 50 caliber guns were set to converge at 400 yards. German pilots who had become used to head-on attacks now faced direct and accurate fire that was difficult to avoid. Combat reports from November showed the impact. The 91st Bomb Group flew B-17Fs equipped with Chin turrets on a mission to Gelsenkirchen. 12 frontal attacks were recorded. 10 ended early while 2 continued and received damage. 1 Focke-Wulf was confirmed destroyed. No bombers were lost to frontal attacks during that mission. Boeing added the Chin turret to the B-17G production model. The first aircraft was completed in December 1943. This version became the main flying fortress used in the war. Production took place at Boeing plants in Seattle and Wichita and also at Douglas Aircraft Company in Long Beach and Tulsa and Vega Aircraft Corporation in Burbank. All manufacturers produced B-17G aircraft with the standard Chin turret. Production increased quickly. 50 aircraft were built per month in January 1944. This rose to 120 per month by March and 230 per month by June. A total of 8,680 B-17G aircraft were produced before production ended in April 1945. Every one of these aircraft included the Chin turret that originated from the YB-40 program. The 303rd Bomb Group began using B-17Gs in February 1944 and their losses from frontal attacks dropped from 12% to 3%. The 379th Bomb Group reported a similar change from 11% to 4%. The 384th Bomb Group kept detailed records. Before the Chin turret they lost 43 bombers to frontal attacks in 6 months. After the Chin turret they lost 14 in 12 months. Analysts in the 8th Air Force calculated that the Chin turret reduced bomber losses from frontal attacks by 71% across all units and missions. By VE Day the B-17G equipped 26 heavy bombardment groups in Europe along with 4 in Italy and 2 in the Pacific for a total of 32 groups. Each group operated 48 aircraft on standard missions, which meant 1,536 B-17Gs could be in combat at the same time. The YB-40 program lasted 3 months and flew 48 combat sorties. It claimed 5 German fighters and cost $5.6 million. It did not succeed as an escort concept. However, the Chin turret developed from those 12 aircraft was installed on 8,680 flying fortresses. It protected crews during more than 290,000 combat sorties and is estimated to have saved about 2,300 crews who might have been lost to frontal attacks. The escort concept ended, but its key innovation continued to provide value. The Chin turret was not the only feature that continued from the YB-40. Engineers studying combat reports identified other changes that improved performance. One example was the staggered waist gun positions. On standard B-17F aircraft both waist gunners stood directly opposite each other, which limited movement and efficiency. They struggled for space and often collided during attacks from side angles, which reduced their effectiveness. Combat footage showed waist gunners blocking each other while trying to track fast-moving targets. The YB-40 solved this by moving the right waist gun position forward by 30 inches, which created a staggered layout. Each gunner now had more room to move and could operate their weapon through a full range without interference. This reduced contact during combat. Boeing applied staggered waist positions to the B-17G. Gunners reported a 40% improvement in firing range along with fewer issues during reload and better coordination when facing attacks from both sides. The 94th Bomb Group recorded their results. Before this change, engagement time averaged 12 seconds before interference occurred. After the change, gunners could track targets continuously for 27 seconds. The third improvement came from reviewing the YB-40 tail gunner position. Sergeant Kak had reported limited visibility from the standard layout during combat. The windows were small and the view was restricted, which made it difficult to track fighters approaching from the rear and below. The Army Air Forces worked with the Cheyenne Modification Center in Wyoming to redesign the tail section. The new design included larger windows, improved visibility above and below, better gun mounting and stronger protection. This became known as the Cheyenne tail and was added to later B-17G aircraft. 3 key improvements came from a program that did not succeed. The chin turret, the staggered waist gun positions, and the Cheyenne tail were all added to the B-17G. Each of these changes improved crew survival throughout the war. Captain James Hartwell continued flying standard B-17F aircraft and completed 16 more missions. He reached his 25 mission requirement in October 1943 and returned home to Pennsylvania. He did not fly the YB-40 again after the mission to St. Nazaire. In December he returned to Allenbury as a training officer. The first B-17G aircraft were arriving and crews gathered around them, examining the new chin turret and asking about its use and origin. Hartwell explained the YB-40 program and described how it could not maintain speed and became vulnerable. He then demonstrated the turret and explained how the bombardier operated it and how the ammunition was loaded. The crews listened and understood that this system came from an earlier failure. One pilot asked Hartwell if the YB-40 effort had been worthwhile considering the cost and the risks taken by the crews who flew those aircraft. Hartwell looked at the B-17G and considered the impact of the improvements. He thought about frontal attacks and how bombers now had a direct defense. He thought about the thousands of aircraft that would use this system before the war ended. He concluded that it was worth the cost and the effort because it improved survival for future crews. The final YB-40 mission took place on July 29, 1943. By August the program was officially ended. By November the remaining 12 aircraft returned to the United States. Most were used for training and some were scrapped. One appeared in the 1946 film The Best Years of Our Lives in a scrapyard scene. No complete YB-40 survived the war and none were preserved in museums. However, its influence remained present in every B-17G that operated over Europe. Each crew that survived a frontal attack benefited from its design changes. The 8th Air Force flew more than 290,000 combat sorties with B-17G aircraft. The chin turret was used in over 114,000 of those missions and is estimated to have prevented about 2,300 bomber losses, which represents tens of thousands of crew members. The National Museum of the United States Air Force displays a B-17G aircraft named Shoo 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 Baby. The chin turret is visible as part of its standard equipment, though its origin is not always highlighted. The broader history often focuses on success such as the B-17G and its role in the war, while overlooking programs that did not succeed like the YB-40. The YB-40 demonstrated that even unsuccessful designs can produce valuable improvements. It showed that challenges can lead to effective solutions and that testing under real conditions can reveal what works and what does not. Engineers reviewed the results and kept the useful elements while removing the limitations. The chin turret remained while the extra weight was eliminated. This approach provided a practical improvement that increased survivability. If this story was useful, then consider supporting the channel. Your engagement helps share these historical accounts with a wider audience. You can also share where you are watching from and contribute to preserving these stories.